there are no Russians, nor English, Jews nor Christians, but only those who pursue one aim, to be able to be.
If we were to build a contemporary teaching out of the world's ancient systems, Sufism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, and so forth, we need access to their major temples, which in our age has never been more possible, access to their major texts and translations of those texts, because they're rarely in our native tongue, which again in our age are very accessible, and insight into their original aims and methods, which we could gain from Gurdjieff and Ouspensky's presentation of the Fourth Way. But if we did this, if we approached the world's ancient systems from the unique perspective of the Fourth Way, we would effectively be paving the Fourth Way into the 21st century.
The study of systems of ancient knowledge begins with the study of a language. All ideas in this new language are concentrated around one idea, the idea of evolution.
We are not speaking of an encyclopedic accumulation of all the knowledge that ever existed, but of a selective gathering of only those ideas that are helpful for the psychological evolution of man. The result would be a pyramid, the ingredients of man's possible evolution at the base, all pointing to the fulfillment of his possibilities at the top. At the foundation of our pyramid, we draw from Buddhism, from the story of the life of Prince Siddhartha. But instead of approaching it as an historical account of the life of a prince, we approach it as an allegorical expression of the psychological evolution of man. After all, Buddha means the enlightened one. So the episodes in the life of the Buddha are episodes that lead to enlightenment. At the time of Prince Siddhartha's auspicious birth, a sage prophesies that he will grow to become either a great monarch or an enlightened being. His father, the king, wishing to effect the former and avoid the latter, confines his son to a palace full of luxury. So the prince grows up for a long time, not realizing that he's in a controlled and conditioned environment.
Evolution can be necessary to man himself when he realizes his position, realizes the possibility of changing this position, realizing that he has powers that he does not use, riches that he does not see.
Like Siddhartha, we too must realize our unconsciousness and the possibility of attaining consciousness. Realize our conditioned knowledge and the possibility of acquiring more precise knowledge. Realize our enslavement to morality and the need of awakening conscience, which is why the first step of our pyramid is called realization. And like Siddhartha, our realization is gradual, slowly realizing that we are not in a luxurious palace, but in a prison. As this verification grows, so does our courage to break free, a chapter known in Buddhism as the Great Departure.
Man has invented many machines, and he knows that a complicated machine needs sometimes years of careful study before one can use it or control it. But he does not apply this knowledge to himself, although he himself is a much more complicated machine than any machine he has invented.
For the second step of our pyramid, we draw from the biblical myth of creation. Here again, we don't approach the myth as historical, but as an allegorical expression of the creation of a cosmos. As above, so below, and as within, so without, the biblical creation mirrors the creation of the microcosmos man.
The means of study is self-observation. It is necessary to observe different functions and distinguish between them, remembering at the same time about different states of consciousness, about our sleep, and about the many eyes in us.
Let there be light represents the light of self-observation. Separating the light from the darkness represents separating the true from the false within us. Naming the objects of creation represents naming the many habits we observe based on the center and feature of their origin. In other words, to evolve, we must know ourselves, which is why we call the second step of our pyramid self-knowledge.
All three centers are filled with habits, and a man can never know himself until he has studied all his habits.
We are not unified. One part of us wishes to evolve, another part remains locked in habit. But this is the mysterious nature of evolution. We become consistent not on the level of our many eyes, but in our ability to observe our many eyes. In other words, we slowly develop a unified observer.
Inner unity is obtained by means of friction, by the struggle between yes and no in man. If a man lives without inner struggle, if everything happens in him without opposition, if he goes wherever he is drawn or wherever the wind blows, he will remain such as he is.
For the last step of our pyramid, we draw from Hinduism, from the myth of the churning of the Milky Ocean. In this myth, the god Vishnu winds a giant serpent around Mount Mandara and instructs the Devas and Asuras to tug at this serpent so as to use the mountain as a churning rod with which to churn the ocean of milk. The habits we observed on the second step will now play the role of Asuras and will be counterbalanced by disciplines which we will form through our work. As in the myth, these will tug against each other, generating the pressure necessary to continue our climb.
We all have our habits, physical and mental, like buffers, to lessen or soften the pressure of life. By freeing ourselves from these habits, pressure grows by itself.
We group our habits into the three primary brains from which they originate. The mind, from which habitual daydreaming originates, the body, from which habitual sensations and movements originate, and the heart, from which habitual negative emotions originate. This division enables us to be very specific in the disciplines we use to counterbalance these habits.
The method of the fourth way consists in doing something in one room and simultaneously doing something corresponding to it in the other two rooms. That is to say, we're working on the physical body to work simultaneously on the mind and the emotions.
Because habits are so deeply ingrained, pulling against habit requires a moment-to-moment effort. This affects an internal churning, just as in the Hindu myth. Churned milk becomes butter, churned wood combusts. If we persist in this conscious labor and voluntary suffering, we will, in due time, be transformed into an altogether different state of consciousness, which is why the third and last step of our pyramid is called transformation.
If a struggle begins in man, and particularly if there is a definite line in this struggle, then gradually permanent traits begin to form themselves. He begins to crystallize.
So if we were to build a contemporary teaching out of the world's ancient systems, we'd have to apply them practically. We'd have to use them as mirrors by which to see ourselves. We'd have to study them by studying ourselves. This is the principle of the fourth way, or any system that acknowledges that man is incomplete, that he can become more than he is, that he must be taught to be.
Only those who pursue one aim, to be able to be,